I'm from Australia, so I came a very long way. And on the plane here, two things happened. The first one that I'm particularly excited about is I made it through the entire 8th season of Game of Thrones. That was on my to-do list for a very, very long time. So finally, winter, we're done with winter. But more importantly, I was thinking about service transformation and the theme here of this forum, and I thought to myself, what is the most transformative technology in my life that's ever been, right? And so here's the answer. This is the very first computer that I've ever owned, an Amiga 500, which I got roundabout in the 1990s as a kid in primary school. And I've also done a lot of work over the years with computer scientists, and they like to tell stories typically how their first computer always inspired them to become computer scientists and learn a programming language and those sort of things. You see, that never happened to me. Actually, as a kid, as an 11-year-old or whatever, I was really more interested in playing the latest computer game. And so my buddies on the schoolyard and we've developed this intricate trading system for computer games. So a very early sharing economy, if you will, platform that we'll be talking about today. And I think it's probably fair to say that I've always been more interested in the intersection of business and technology rather than just technology itself. But that Amiga led to a journey around the world, really from a undergraduate and master's degree at the University of Münster in Germany to a PhD in New Zealand, a postdoc in the US with Paul Maglio, and then I've spent the better part of the last 5 years working at the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. However, in July, I left Melbourne for UQ Business School, and there's two reasons. The first is the weather, and you can see this. This is my office. So I think that's self-explanatory. But more importantly, UQ actually did establish, as of January this year, the UQ Service Innovation Alliance, and I lead this group together with my colleague, Janet McCall-Kennedy. We are the first in the Southern Hemisphere to have a dedicated group centered on service. And there's about 70 of us, academic, faculty, postdocs, PhD students, industry members. And what we do is we do research, use-based research, so really centered on industry problems, looking into new customer experiences, service workers, and service innovation. So if you're ever in Brisbane or in Australia, please do come and visit and do say hello. Now, with that said, the topic for today's talk is service platforms. And what I'd like to kick things off with is a bit of a reflection that is centered more or less on the last 7 years of service platform research work that I've done with PhD students and academic collaborators. And that's led to a number of publications in that field. Now, before we can talk about service platforms, though, I think each and every one of you who's heard anything about platforms or who's been to a talk or you maybe scrolled around on some website, you may have come across this internet meme. And it's by a guy called Tom Goodwin, and he basically said, around about 2014, 2015, Uber, the world's largest taxi company, they don't own any vehicles. Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider without real estate. Alibaba, world's largest retail, no inventory, right? This thing's been going on forever. It's been super viral. And I think we really need to stop using it because it's inherently limited. Here's why. That perspective on platforms, A, is firm-centric. We only talk about the firm. That means we're not talking about everyone else that is either involved or affected by these organizations. We don't talk about customers, we don't talk about the regulators, we don't talk about society, the ecosystem, right? We've had this conversation earlier today. Also, that perspective is essentially telling a story that if you have a platform-based business, all you do is get rid of physical resources. And obviously, that is not the case, right? So just because I have a platform doesn't mean I don't need any physical resources. And it's a worldview that I think Steve may call good-centric. And I think that is, of course, not good. So platforms are really having a profound socioeconomic impact on the world in which we live today. And this is why we need to put Tom Goodwin's story here to rest. Now, before we can talk about platforms though, what I would like to do with you guys is to actually look at the literature in which this platform research takes place. And that brings us to digital transformation. Now, if you're a service researcher and if you talk about transformation, then you may think that this is sort of a new thing and you should really be getting into this these days. But the truth is, there's a bunch of disciplines out there who have investigated transformative digital phenomena forever, such as the business IS literature, right? Investigating digital transformative phenomena is a key foundation of the discipline since the 1990s. However, the field has moved on, right? Within IS, community understands that just focusing on the IT artifact, maybe not so good. So we should look into ecosystems. And what's really been revolutionary is this 2017 editorial by Aaron Rush, who actually said, we should be integrating theories and insights from other fields, like marketing. Now, if you've ever been to an IS conference, this will or should blow your mind. And he's right, because marketing scholars have done really good work at the intersection of technology, because they understand and understood for a long time that technology is central to doing marketing. And we've had contributions ranging from consumer power in the digital age, co-creation of brands. I mean, the list goes on, right? But again, same story here. The good marketing folks understand that there is a lot of need to do more research. And then, of course, service science as an interdisciplinary field draws on both fields and has done lots of work on technology and service, again, for a very long time. Here's the important bit, though. If you look at the literature more holistically, a number of opportunities actually emerge. And these opportunities are important for us because they help us understand what direction to go into. Here we go. All right, so first of all, what we really should be doing is we need to de-emphasize the prevailing focus on the IT artifact. That means if we do platform research, then the study itself should not be centered on the platform, but anything and everything else that surrounds it. We also want to use multidisciplinary lenses and theories. And again, the beauty here is that we now have this almost dyadic perspective where the IS discipline says, gee, we should really be doing more work with the marketing folks. And the marketing folks are saying, gee, we should be doing more work with the IS folks, right? So this is really the perfect time in history, if you do anything in this wider service IT type space, to be a scholar. I mean, this is the most amazing and exciting time. And also, and I think this is, in my opinion, the most important element, it's about novel research designs and new sources of data, because the questions that we're trying to address are complex, and with the more traditional methodological canon that is available, and also the new sources of data that have become available, we are now able to do things we couldn't do previously. Now, with that said, we've had a little bit of a discussion earlier in the session today around platforms and what platforms are. So I think this is a great point to start and to really look into the concept of the platform, because it's really poorly understood. Now, but it's a very popular concept. So in the engineering literature, they've been talking about platforms for a really long time. However, the engineers, they see platforms as technical artifacts that facilitate innovation. So for example, a company like VW, they might develop a new chassis, so this thing, a frame, if you will, and they call it a platform. You chuck wheels on it, you put brakes on it and the car, and essentially it's a way for them to build cars using economies of scope and economies of scale, and then sell it off under the Golf or the Seat or the Skoda brand. You're essentially buying the same car, but it's based on this platform. Industrial economics. They also talk about platforms, but a platform here is a multi-sided market that mediates transactions between individual groups. So the classic example are gaming consoles, the Sony PlayStation, Xbox, etc. You have Group A. Group A might be the folks who play computer games, and then you have Group B, and Group B is the folks who make computer games. Now, they meet on this market, and ultimately the question is, how do you generate competitiveness in this market? And that ultimately means it's the chicken and the egg problem you need to solve, because if you don't have any games, then no gamer will buy the platform. And vice versa, if you don't have any gamers, then no game developer will start investing into your market. And then it's ultimately a continuous story about competition between individual multi-sided markets. Technology management and IS, again, they also talk about platforms, sort of similar to the engineers. However, here the platform is really what is typically referred to as a code base. So a number of technical codes that can be used in software development. Google's Android is a classic example, and then individual developers can use that code base to develop initial applications within that framework. Okay? So broad overview of the literature. Now, Rod, Brody, and I have a slightly different view on platforms, and this is it. So we started thinking about platforms round about in 2013. And the definition that we actually came up with is we're talking about engagement platforms. And engagement platforms, in our definition, are either physical or virtual touchpoints. And these are designed to provide the structural support for the exchange and integration of resources, and thereby co-creation of value, between individual actors in a service system. So what you have is the widest service ecosystem. And someone of you asked earlier this question, can a service ecosystem be a platform and a platform be an ecosystem? And so my answer to that question is actually depends on the unit of analysis that you take and the level of abstraction, right? So if you take a macro level lens and use the ecosystem as your unit of analysis, then you have a platform, an engagement platform, that is part of that ecosystem. If you adopt a meso level of analysis and the platform is your unit of analysis, then you might as well say, okay, yes, the platform represents an ecosystem. However, we tend to focus on actor engagement practices, and that's the micro level of analysis. And so within the platform, you have a unique value proposition that then enables the exchange of resources and co-creation of value between those folks on a micro level. So as a case in point, Uber, the platform, has a value proposition to Group A, go and use your car and drive people around, make some extra money on the site, and a value proposition to the other folks, which is go and don't use a taxi, and this is super convenient, and others will drive you around. What they do is they facilitate the co-creation of value, resource integration, and experience of value in social use and social context, and then basically clip the tickets, make some money along the side. Now, how did we get here, though? And this is really, I think, the more important element of our retrospective. And it all started off, and this is a bit of a story, in round about 2013 when Rod Brody approached me and he said, Christoph, we gotta do a paper on engagement platforms. And I didn't know what engagement platforms were. I was a postdoc at the time at the University of California, and I was keen, I had some time to do a little side project. So I did a little bit of reading, but it didn't really hit me. But what did really strike me at the time was the fact that there was a lot of rumor in the US business press that Google would actually open up a physical retail store, the Google shop. And I lived in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's lots of tech stuff anyway. And they had those shop within a shop concepts at a big electronics chain. So this sort of struck me as weird, right? Why would Google open up a retail bricks and mortar shop? And actually it turned out that they were not the only one. Amazon opened up physical retail stores as well. And Microsoft had been operating physical retail stores for quite some time in the US. And I didn't understand this because back in the 1990s, the big .com time, it was all about going digital, right? So we had banking, a traditional service in a bricks and mortar environment. You have to rock up at a particular point in time, you talk to a human, etc., etc. All of a sudden, there's online banking. Retail, all of a sudden, there's online shopping. Government interactions, all of a sudden, there's e-government. And so now we see the reverse opposite. All those organizations that I've only known in a digital context, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Google, they go physical, they go bricks and mortar. But why? Why would they actually do this? So at that point, I started to think to myself, well, maybe this is now the right problem that we could investigate using the engagement platform concept. And so I started reading and thinking. I had a lot of time to think back then. Unfortunately, I don't have this luxury anymore. But so when you postdoc, those are the best days, really. And I came across this guy, John Naisbitt. Now, John Naisbitt is a self-proclaimed futurist, and in 1982, he wrote this book, and there's a key quote, and he said, "The more high technology around us, the more need for the human touch." And that sort of struck me, right? I said, is that what it is? Is it about the human touch? This is why Google is opening up a bricks and mortar show? And I also looked into the definitions that then existed on engagement platforms, and Ramaswamy was really leading the pack here, but he talked about purpose-built ICT-enabled environments containing artifacts, interfaces, blah, blah, for the co-creation of value with customers. So that didn't fit my explanation or understanding of an engagement platform either, because they had nothing to do with physical realms, right? This did not explain the Google shop. It was nice, but not what I needed. And so I started to look into Google and try to understand what it actually is that they're doing. And so at the time, and still today, this is what they did. They had a number of dedicated pieces of technology. The Nexus phone, the Chromebook, Google Glass was sort of big at the time. And what you need to know is, again, at the time in the US, if you wanted to go and buy a regular laptop, MacBook, that would be about $1,000 US. Give or take. But the Chromebook came in at $150. It was super cheap. And it was a decent laptop, if I've seen it, and it wasn't too bad. They had the operating system, Android. They had the online services, the YouTubes, the Bings, the Gmails. And the clicker is very slow. There we go. The online services. They had the app marketplace. This is where you buy the apps to run your Chromebook. And then they had the physical stores. So this is what Google did and still does at the time. And then with Microsoft, it turns out it was the same thing. They also had a dedicated suite of information technology, the Xbox, their laptops and phones, software operating systems, Windows, and the Office suite, the physical stores, and then online services like Skype or Bing, although I don't think. And then I tried to understand this. And so I realized that there is actually no such thing as a platform. What we really need to be talking about is an ecosystem of individual platforms that all fulfill a specific purpose and have a different state. So the state can be either virtual or physical, right? Stuff, or something that's immaterial. And then they have a different purpose. They either are about transaction, so resource exchange, or they're about interactions and resource integration. And so all of a sudden, it made sense because it's not about the platform, it's about the ecosystem itself. And we introduced the notion of the engagement ecosystem in the 2014 MSQ paper. And we defined engagement ecosystems as dynamic configurations that consist of mutually dependent engagement platforms that individually represent interactive facilitative loci. That is our understanding of an engagement ecosystem. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run you through all of those individual archetypes of platforms. And I think it will make sense to you then as well. So first of all, we have the operating platform. And the operating platform in the context of Google, that's the Gmail, the YouTube, the Google search. Now what Google wants is, it wants you guys to watch as many YouTube videos as humanly possible, right? Don't do it now, but maybe later, right? Because if you watch YouTube videos, you watch ads. And if you watch ads, they make money, and they want to make money. So how can Google make sure that you guys watch a bunch of YouTube? Well, first of all, you have to have a computer or a phone to do it. And this is what they got to provide you with. This is the instrumental platform, the Chromebook, the Nexus phone. And by making that very cheap, they make it more accessible to a wide variety of individuals. Because not everybody, especially not in the US, can afford a $1,000 MacBook. Now, if you have that instrumental platform, you also need the app marketplace, because otherwise, people won't get it. So all of a sudden, you're there with an enabling platform. And this is where you get your apps to make the Chromebook really nice and shiny. And last but not least, we're getting to the supplying platform, and this is where the Google Shop comes in. Now remember the quote from John Naisbitt, right? The more high technology around us, the higher the need for the human touch. I think in this context, we actually need to take that literally. Because as humans, we like haptic sensations, right? If you have a MacBook, touch it. You feel the metal, it's nice and shiny and cold, right? Feels great, feels expensive. And this is what people do. So if you have a shop, people can come in and they can feel the Chromebook or whatever they want to sell, or the Microsoft device. And then they actually have the human touch, and they are able to bring it all together and suck you into the system, and before you know it, you'll be stuck with Google or Microsoft. And so that was the story, and ultimately then made a contribution to my personal understanding and or lack of understanding of why Google would open up a physical store, and also made a contribution to the wider engagement platform literature. We ended up winning a couple of awards for that paper, and it really sparked first of all, a fantastic collaboration between Rob Brody and I, but also a series of ongoing papers. And that was really the first one that we did. Now, key takeaway for you guys right now, there is no such thing as the platform, right? They always interact in wider ecosystems, and over the years there's been a lot of research going on platforms and virtually every discipline broadly associated with a business school. But platform research still takes place in isolated disciplinary silos, right? The IS folks do platform research within their realm. The marketing people do it within their realm. And that's not good. The work is still methodologically immature. It answers basic questions. It overemphasizes the role of technology, and simultaneously it black boxes the IT artifact of like, hey, there's a platform, it does stuff, and here's an outcome. Now, let me take you back to my initial slide, digital transformation research, right? This is not what we want to do. The way forward is to de-emphasize the focus on the IS artifact and to apply novel research designs and data. How can we do this? Now, moving on, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about two studies of mine that are currently work in progress, where we've tried to move forward in this direction, right? And it's not a perfect world, but those are examples that may provide you with some insights, and also I appreciate any comments or feedback from you guys on our work in progress. So the first study here is really centered around trying to the need to understand the orchestration of value co-creation in the context of peer-to-peer lending platforms. Now, traditionally, or in a 2008 paper, SD Logic implicitly assumed that customers are always willing and able co-creators of value. However, work has since sort of refuted this. We have bounded rationality, lack of skill, or willingness have indicated otherwise. And in 2016, we had Steve and Bob, trying to click, acknowledge that there's an absence of clearly articulated specification mechanisms of coordination and cooperation involved in the co-creation of value. Co-creation processes need to be coordinated through actor-generated institutions. And that brings me to the idea that I was trying to understand how value co-creation processes can be orchestrated. That's what I'm trying to do. And ultimately, orchestration in the existing work is viewed as a black box. So we've had a paper out in 2016 in JSR, Jesus, what's that? Where we looked into how humans can orchestrate value co-creation in healthcare contexts. But what we did there, it was work that really looked into the fact that there can be an orchestrator or there's no orchestrator. But this work did not take into consideration that there might be different degrees to which orchestration can take place and different practices with which orchestration can take place. However, in the context of peer-to-peer lending, we can actually study this. Now, how many of you are familiar with peer-to-peer lending? okay, some but not all. Peer-to-peer lending is essentially kind of like Uber for money, right? So let's say you get a PhD scholarship, and you're really good with money, so end of the year you have some cash left over. You can go to lendingclub.com and lend that money to others, make some cash on the side with the interest. Conversely, you're maybe not so good with money, had some unexpected expenses, can't afford to buy Christmas gifts. You can go to peer-to-peer lending platforms and get a loan from someone, and you become a borrower. And that's how the whole thing works. And there's a bunch of different platforms out there. They all function slightly differently. But if we talk about the orchestration of value co-creation, so the interactions between individual actors in a peer-to-peer lending context, there are really two key practices that are important. The first one is the setting of the interest rate, and the second one is the allocation of the loan. So the matchmaking, is Joe going to contribute to Jim's loan, or vice versa? And these two practices can be performed either by the human actor or by the platform. And that brings us to 4 archetypes of orchestration. The first one, which we call peer-to-peer bidding, and the platform ThinCats is one example. And that is basically a low degree of orchestration. The human does virtually everything. You set your own interest rate, you allocate your own loan to whoever you want to give the money to, and off you go. The other extreme is what we call automated lending. Lendingclub.com is an example, and here the platform takes care of all of that. So you just really basically provide your money, the platform will hand out the cash, and they will set the interest rate based on whatever mechanism they use. And then there's 2 intermediary type options, automated bidding. Fundingcircle.com is one example, and Har Money, and we call this peer-to-peer lending, where the platform sets the interest rate, but the human actor allocates the loan. And so that brings us to this continuum of orchestration. And so the question here that we're asking is quite simple. So how do these varying levels of service orchestration ultimately affect platform performance, right? So is that good, is that bad? How should it work? And what's the impact? Shift the discourse and use agent-based modeling. Now, agent-based modeling, or ABMs, that is a computational method. It is a way to simulate interactions in complex systems, especially when those interactions are heterogeneous and nonlinear. So we have a paper that we're presenting next Monday at the ICIS conference, where we actually draw on it took us about a year to figure out how to do this. And we explain how this can actually work. But I don't want to go into detail here now, because again, we're going to talk about this next Monday. But what I would like to do is I would like to show you the prototype that we've developed. Now, in this particular prototype, and this is the most basic one that we could develop, we have 2 types of agents. We have borrowers and we have lenders. We've defined attributes for both of these agents, so they have an initial wealth. The lenders have a risk appetite, the borrowers have a risk score. You don't want to hand out the cash to anyone, and they perform a number of actions. So they could search, a borrower could search for a lender, they could ask for the loan, they can repay, default, decide to re-engage, and the lenders can choose a borrower or they can lend. And then in the model we set the number of agents, the ratio of borrowers to lenders, and simulation time, etc. With that said, we then went and started coding in Python. And when I say we, I really mean Maria Torres, one of my PhD students, so the entire credit belongs to her here for figuring out how to pull this off in Python. Now, what you see here is the prototype of the simulation. So what we're doing is we're representing the peer-to-peer lending platform on a grid. The individual red dots that you see are lenders. They represent lenders, and they sit there and they wait in that platform for someone to swing by and asking a loan. Now, the little blue dots that you see moving around, those are the borrowers, and they search for a loan and they try to find a lender and get their money. Now, at some point in time, they are ultimately successful, and they turn gray, and they form those little clusters around the lenders, and those are first-time borrowers that then repay a loan, and then again, further on, they turn green, and those are returning borrowers repaying a loan. Now, The simulation runs for a dedicated amount of time, and because it is a simulation, we can also speed up the whole thing, and then the simulation will run ultimately a little faster. So what the simulation ultimately allows us to do is we can define the parameters and the interactions in a way that we could never really do with empirical data. And then we generate the data and we see what actually happens, and we use that output to either support or not support our hypotheses. What we did already find out, and again, remember this is a prototype work in progress, we understand that there are little clusters that are forming. We are able to understand performance in terms of served versus unserved loans. We understand how long it takes individual borrowers, based, for example, on their risk appetite, to find a lender, and we measure something through the time steps. But there's still a lot of work left to be done. So we still need to refine the simulation parameters. We still need to simulate models 1, 3, and 4. And lendingclub.com actually has provided the world with a publicly available data set, and we're going to now look into that data set to make sure that the parameters that we have are actually aligned with the ones that we've decided. So this was probably going to be the next 6 months or so of our work. But the fundamental contribution here is to build and test theory that links the orchestration of value co-creation to platform performance, something I'm very excited about. To the best of my knowledge, we will be the first ones to adopt ABM in service research. There is some work in the IS and the marketing literature on ABM, but we're definitely the first ones to shift into digital realms. So typically, simulations have been used in, say, ecological systems, forests, fisheries, that sort of thing, but not in digital realms. So, with that said, if you would like to know more, this is the paper that's going to be presented on Monday. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll be happy to share it with you. All right, study 2. Study 2 is another piece in progress, and here I'm trying to understand competition, platform competition. Very simple question: why is it that some platforms succeed and others don't? Especially in the ride-sharing market. Ride-sharing, the Ubers, right? It's the same thing. They all have the exact same design. There's a platform. The platform facilitates physical transportation between individual actors. And there's the Uber, the Lyft, the Ola, the Didi, the Shiba, and so on and so forth. And there's a great way to actually study competition between platforms, because there's a revelatory case. And that revelatory case is the competition between Uber and Didi Xuxing in China. Now, current understanding of platform competition follows largely the literature streams that we've discussed previously. So we're looking at technical standards, we're looking at hardware, we're looking at software, and factors that are typically associated with platform performance range from individual platform owners' bargaining power to pricing, technology design, existence of a market, general market fit. And again, this is typically work that emphasizes the artifact on a meso level perspective, but I am trying to dive into the micro level here. So the shift is to move away from the platform and to look at platform competition from the perspective of individual customers, which, according to some, is core to the advancement of service science. All right? So, as I said, revelatory case, Uber and Didi Xuxing in China. It's a great example for a platform competition that took place in retrospective, so we know actually who won and who lost. And I don't want to spoil the fun, but Uber is the one who lost. So what happened? 2014, Uber enters the Chinese market, initially active in Beijing and Shanghai. And then in 2015, in February, Didi Xuxing is founded. And it's actually a merger based on two taxi hailing apps. So they actually at that point had nothing to do with ride sharing in the sharing economy context. Those were apps Didi Dashi and Kuaidi Dashi you could use to call yourself a cab. And then between 2015 and 2016, we see classic technology management Tushman-Rosenkopf technology lifecycle type literature panning out. And that is incremental innovation and competition. So what Uber does is they introduce a new offering, Uber Pool, that is carpooling essentially in China. And the good folks at Didi say, all right, what we're going to do is Didi Hitch, that's for commuting. And then Uber is like, well, we can do that too. So they introduce Uber Commute for commuting. And then the folks at Didi are like, well, if you copy us, we copy you. And they introduce Didi Express for carpooling. By 2016, Uber is active in 37 cities in China. They have round about 18 million active users per month. Substantial growth at about 890%, 300 employees. But Didi, much bigger, active in 400 cities, some 60 million active users, 5,000 employees. And then ultimately in August 2016, Didi Chuxing takes over Uber. And that's the end of it. So what happened? First of all, Bloomberg called Didi Shanghai as the CEO, as the Uber Slayer. I thought that was a very delightful cover. But what's really more interesting here is not so much the focus on the Uber Slayer, but the fact that Uber is really tiny globally in comparison to Didi Chuxing. So that is a massive, massive operation in China alone. And the public, especially in the Western media, had a very interesting view on this whole thing. So public perception, Uber crashed in China, Uber failed in China, they just didn't really make it, and they couldn't crack the market. So if you read all of that stuff and you look into the literature, not the literature, but the public press, there's really three perspectives of try to explain why that happened. And the first one is, well, the Chinese government interfered. Uber couldn't make it because, you know, the government came in and that was the end of it. Okay. Number two, Uber actually didn't fail. Success in China just needs to be defined differently than in the US. I'm not sure how, but again, that is a perspective, especially in the US media. And then last but not least, now the folks at Uber, they actually understand China. Didn't go so well, but now they understand it, so they can use that knowledge in their subsequent ventures. And there is this group commonly referred to as the Uber Mafia, and that's a group of former Uber employees in China who are now starting new ventures. Yeah, look, I think this is sort of not very insightful, not very explanatory. And again, my desire was to take a different lens and to understand it from the customer's perspective, right? So the idea was, oh, maybe customers actually tell us about their experience with Uber and with Didi Chuxing. And if we understand the experience of individual customers on a micro level, then we can understand why they failed or why they ultimately had to leave. So that was the starting point. And how do you do this? Well, there's this thing called Weibo, and Weibo is the Chinese equivalent to Twitter. So a short messaging type social media platform where people can, you know, share all sorts of things. And so that's what I did. I got myself some 20,000 individual Weibo postings that discussed individuals' experience with either Didi Chuxing or with Uber. And the beautiful thing is each individual Weibo posting comes with a timestamp. So I could actually get the data initially from the day that Uber entered the Chinese market to the day when the merger and takeover was announced. And so beautiful snapshot on exactly that period. The data was massively skewed. There's about 19,000 Didi postings and just about 1,300 Uber postings. And then after cleaning the data, removing duplicates, false positives, etc., we're left with just about 10,000 Weibo postings altogether. Still not bad, but you know, again, it's not bad. Next step, little sentiment analysis. And again, there's a standardized package, the GBA toolkit that you can use for that. And that helped me to classify the whole thing into positive Weibo postings, negative or neutral Weibo postings. And then last but not least, we tried to understand what the individual themes are in that data. And we used a machine learning approach called topic modeling. And topic modeling is a piece of natural language analysis, broadly comparable to a thematic qualitative analysis based on statistical analysis of word co-occurrences. And again, if you're interested in that, we have a paper out in JSR in 2018 where we used the topic modeling approach to analyze the entire service innovation and design literature, some 8 million words. And this is what I found. So this is, oh, by the way, this is an individual Weibo posting, right? So you have an ID for the user, Justin. That's the unique message identifier, the content of the message, and then it comes with some metadata, date, time, how many times has this message been forwarded, commented, liked, etc. But to wrap up, what I would like to leave you guys with is if you do any work at the intersection of technology and service, or maybe even platforms more generally, then do it in a new way, do it differently, de-emphasize the focus on technology. It's really not about technology, it's about the ecosystem in which technology is used, experienced, and influenced the life of all of us.